Joe, did you know that Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens is the only national park unit dedicated to freshwater plants?
I did not.
Now you know.
And knowing is half the battle.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Science Sort of. This is episode 314, and our theme this week is You Win Some, You Lose Some. I'm your host, Ryan Haupton. Joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science is, what's that? Up in the sky? It's a bird? It's a plane? No, wait, it's a silent glider. Who's in this glider? Hey, I'm going to wait for it to land. There's not going to be anything to hear because it's a quiet... Oh, I guess there is a little noise associated with the glider. A cockpit is opening up. Oh my gosh, it's Joe.
Hi.
Hello, Joe.
I just flew in from New Mexico, and boy, are my arms tired.
I wasn't expecting you to glide in like that, but it's a very carbon neutral way of getting yourself across the country. So I appreciate you taking the time. But yeah, how you doing, man?
Good, pretty good.
You're like a legit glider guy now.
I am a legit glider guy now. The Federal Aviation Administration has seen fit to bestow me with the honor of glider pilot.
Now, I have been doing trapeze.
Okay.
How long before I can be pulled behind your glider on the little croissant-shaped flying disc that the small bear child used in the television program Tailspin? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. For a second, I thought you were going to go with the little flyer thing from the...
It was croissant-shaped, right? Like, because... I know that was a weird
crescent shaped.
Wow, really? Yeah, you. Yep. That's the word that would have been better to use. Thank you, Joe.
It would have, but I mean, now I want a croissant. So there's that.
I almost never don't want a croissant. Julie told me the other day she's not that into croissants, and I didn't know how to feel because I'm a big fan of a croissant.
How can you not be into croissant?
I don't know. She likes an English muffin, so I guess that's the saving grace. But yeah,
but like, a croissant's so much better.
I agree.
Like. I dig an English muffin. I just had an English muffin, but it would be better if it was a croissant.
Tell you what I do. You want to know what I do?
What do you do?
The organic market in our neighborhood sells ham and cheese croissants. So I'll get one of those, bring it home. When I'm just doing grocery shopping for like dinner or whatever, next morning, slowly heat up the croissant in a pan while cooking an egg, either just a fried egg or like one scrambled egg. And then I cut the croissant open lengthwise, open it up, put the egg in, close it back up, little croissant egg sandwich.
Nice.
It's great.
Sounds tasty.
It's a fine way to break your fast. So is the glider going to be able to pull me? Because trapeze skills means, and I grew up water skiing and still like to water ski from time to time. So I feel like I would be good at holding on to the bar. Right? I've got the coordination, the core strength. I'm ready. So what certification do you need to do that with me?
I guess that would count as being a rated tow pilot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And how long before Disney gives us a quote-unquote live action movie of Tailspin?
I mean, it's a matter of time. I think we should probably demonstrate it first.
Ooh, yeah, Tailspin. Yeah. So thanks for joining us, Joe. Thanks for taking a break from riding thermals.
Absolutely.
And let's introduce the interview segment. So this episode, I interviewed Peter Brannen, who is a journalist, science writer, who wrote a book called The Ends of the World, and it's a book all about extinctions. Really excellent book. I really enjoyed reading it. I'm a paleontologist, and I actually learned quite a bit reading this book because the extinctions that I know the most about are the two most recent ones, the late Pleistocene extinction, 11-ish thousand years ago, and then the end Cretaceous KPG extinction that ended the non-avian dinosaurs, 66 million years ago. But the other extinctions, I had a sense of what caused them, but I didn't have much of the details. And reading Peter's book, the two extinctions I knew the most about, just to preview our conversation a little bit, seem to be two of the least common ways that you can have mass extinctions. Like previous mass extinctions all kind of follow similar patterns or trends, or at least even if they're happening in opposite directions, the opposite direction is still being pushed by the same driver, which you'll see when we get into the interview. I realize I didn't maybe state that very well, but yeah, it was an eye-opening conversation, kind of a sobering one. as well. I think as people will learn. But Peter's a great guest, and even though the revelations I learned about what drives extinctions, spoiler warning, it's carbon dioxide. We're screwed.
But we don't have a carbon dioxide problem.
Thank you for gliding, Joe. And,
it's all a lie.
So we get into that with Peter, even though, like I said, it's a little dire in the actual implications. It's a really fun conversation. So we're going to play that. And Peter and I did a drink segment. So we're just going to run it all the way through. And Joe and I will be back in a bit to do your PaleoPOW.
Yeah, we'll see you in like 2 hours.
No, it wasn't that long. So I am being joined by Peter Brannen, who is an award-winning science journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and Wired, among other publications. His book, The Ends of the World, about the science behind the 5 major mass extinctions in Earth's history, was published by HarperCollins in 2017. It was named a New York Times Editor's Choice and one of the 10 best environment, climate, science, and conservation books of 2017 by Forbes. Peter is currently a Scripps Fellow at the University of Colorado Boulder, and according to paleontologist Dr. Shana Montanari, is a ding-dong who doesn't understand time zones. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is the first time, I think, that I've had an introduction that was fully or mostly written by the guests themselves.
Yeah, I don't think I wrote the last part, but...
That last sentence was a later addition, but yeah, because you came out to DC to give a talk at the Geological Society of Washington, of which I am the program co-chair of. I had access to the bio we asked you to write about yourself, which made doing that part of this introduction very easy.
Yeah, and that was an event that I spoke at extremely fast.
You had to. It's 20 minutes.
Yeah, I didn't cut down my hour-long talk at all. I just decided to say it a lot faster.
I've seen other people use that tactic less successfully, so you pulled it off better than most.
Thank you. Thank you.
I went the opposite route when I gave my talk last year, and I took a talk from SVP that's usually a 12 to 15-minute talk. And since the GSW talks are supposed to be 20 minutes, I was like, well, I'm just going to add in all the background information that I wouldn't need to add for paleontologists, but might need to add for other earth scientists. So I'll just add 5 minutes more of background info.
Right.
I thought that worked really well.
Your talk started, the dictionary defines geology.
The dictionary defines sloth as a deadly sin.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you came and gave a talk at GSW, but you and I had met previously. We met at a Geological Society of America meeting where I found out about your book, The Ends of the World, which is sort of a quick rundown of all 5 major mass extinctions and then a few more on top of it. And so that's an exciting topic, especially for right now. So I guess first question, maybe it's a little bit simplistic, but what made you want to write this book? And I guess more generally, how did you get into science journalism?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of a complicated answer in that my mom was a children's librarian, and I became obsessed with dinosaurs as a young kid. When the picture book she brought home, I just instantly went for all the dinosaur ones. And then it's cliched, but then Jurassic Park came out and I was obsessed with that. And I read T-Rex and the Crater of Doom. And then I guess my interest sort of fell away for a while. And then I became a journalist full-time after college and sort of carved out a niche writing environmental stories, especially about the ocean. And in the meantime, I had kept up with the paleontology literature. So I'd read some books by Peter Ward that were really formative to me about how CO2 might be implicated in the Permian mass extinction. And then I noticed in the modern world that we have all these sort of destructive ways we're interacting with the environment, with overfishing and nutrient pollution, and in the future, global warming and ocean acidification. And I did this week-long program at Woods Hole. It wasn't that long, but it was pretty important for me, where everyone there was talking about ocean acidification in a way that was pretty frightening. And there were people there that were also working on the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum. And I noticed that there were these papers coming out linking the end-Triassic mass extinction to huge injections of CO2 into the air. And I just sort of thought that it was an untold part of the climate story, where we tend to hear about it in the popular press as this theoretical thing that happens in computer models. But the geological record of climate change, to me, I thought was sort of half the story. And I hadn't really read the book for a general audience that I wanted to on this topic. And I just thought it was newsy that literally the worst things that have ever happened in Earth history seem to have a lot to do with giant injections of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and oceans from large igneous provinces. So that's sort of a roundabout answer. I probably need to work on my elevator pitch a little bit better, but that's how I ended up writing about this stuff.
No, that's actually, it leads me perfectly to the kind of big picture thing I wanted to talk about with the book is that this is a book about the big, sexy mass extinctions that's kind of secretly a book about climate change.
Yeah.
Maybe not so secret, maybe explicitly about climate change.
No, I think that was sort of a strategic choice that I think a lot of people's eyes glaze over when they see the words climate change. And so it's sort of an instantly divisive issue, depending on where you are in the country. But by talking about things like dinosaurs and all these things that you see in natural history museums, it was sort of a Trojan horse way into the story. So I've heard from readers who, sounded like they came from a place of climate skepticism and didn't even know this was a book about climate change, but ended up sort of getting a lot out of it and changing their mind about sort of these giant global geochemical cycles that we're now starting to mess with in a major way that sort of only has precedent in a few crazy episodes in Earth history.
But those few crazy episodes in Earth history, you make a really good analogy in the book about how it's sort of like a medical diagnosis where these mass extinctions are the patient history, and now we're looking at symptoms that are very similar towards things that have gone wrong in the past. I thought that was a really clever way of making a relevant example about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not there yet in terms of like the end Permian or any of the major mass extinctions, but it is troubling that we're starting to see some of the same symptoms of ocean acidification and warming and ocean anoxia, all these things that play major roles in some of the biggest mass extinctions ever. We're starting to see glimpses of. So this is sort of a good time to intervene if you're the doctor on planet Earth.
It's funny, the book starts, what's the first extinction you cover? It's the...
Oh, I threw in a bonus one. The Ediacaran-Cambrian boundary.
Fascinating one.
Yeah.
We've talked about helicoplacoids, which I think are one of the most tragic stories in evolutionary biology. It's like this...
Oh my goodness.
this thing that survived in an amazing way until there were burrowing animals that could bioturbate the ocean floor substrate.
Right.
Yeah, and like really maybe the first mass extinction is the oxygenation of our atmosphere, like something that was completely necessary for us to live. But I guess I bring that up to sort of, you talk about the death of the Ediacaran fauna during the Cambrian explosion, which 500 plus million years ago. But while that requires a deep time perspective, that's still, we've already skipped over billions of years of Earth history.
Yeah, right.
And you mentioned things like the boring billions, and I just kind of wanted to ask you, from a journalist perspective, how did you, without having gone through formal geoscience education, how did you wrap your head around the big time or the deep time perspective of a book like this?
Well, I don't think anyone really can, even if you have a PhD in geology. I think that's why you guys come up with these great sort of mnemonics for wrapping your head around them. So I know Paul Olson, like at Columbia, likes to just describe it as if you have like a pint of beer, that multicellular life is just the like foamy head on the very top. But my favorite one that I use in the book is that if you imagine every footstep you take is a century, and you imagine going for a walk, that I think most people would think, you go 20 footsteps back and you're at the Roman Empire exists, you're at zero. And you go a few dozen more footsteps and you're at the golden age of pyramid construction, and there are woolly mammoths living on remote islands off of Alaska and Russia. And you think you haven't walked that far, and woolly mammoths exist on the planet, so it can't be that much further to dinosaurs or that much further to trilobites. That's completely not true. In this analogy, you'd have to walk 20 miles a day for almost 4 years to cover the rest of Earth history. So that's my favorite way of thinking about it, but it still doesn't really help. It just sort of illuminates how impossible it is to think about this stuff.
Yeah, it's funny how geology often exists at scales that kind of defy easy human comprehension, just because things are either so grand, they operate on these planetary continental scales, or they take so long that like my wife and I were talking about, continental drift and Pangea and all these other things. And I was kind of trying to explain, like, you really have to think of the continents not as these stable things that exist, but really like ice cubes in a drink constantly like floating around and bashing into each other, but on a speed that is incomprehensible to us. You just have to like speed it up so many times in your head to make the physics of how these things move around sort of make sense to you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I underline in the book is just how long the so-called age of dinosaurs was. Where when people think about dinosaurs, they say, oh, wasn't that back in Pangea? But when the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, the map looked pretty similar to how it does today, except for Australia still hasn't given up on Antarctica yet, and India's in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and there's the Panama isn't connected. There's no connection between North and South America. But on the most part, it looks pretty similar. And what's amazing is they evolved in the golden age of Pangea. So they were around for long enough for all of the continents to move to pretty close to their present locations at a speed of, fingernails growing, which it just gives you some scale for how long they dominated on the planet.
And still are doing pretty well.
Right. Yeah. Mentioned Paul Olsen again. He makes this claim that they're twice as speciose as mammals, and so we're still in the age of dinosaurs. And in the book, I actually sketch out.
We're talking about birds right now for listeners who aren't following along with that. Yeah. I've made the joke on Twitter, or maybe on this podcast as well. Like, yes, dinosaurs are doing terrible since the KPG extinction. They only live on all 7 continents, can fly, swim underwater, run at 50 miles per hour, and some of them have learned to speak pretty good English.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I actually, in the book, I sketch out this scenario where, if we do ourselves in this possible 6th extinction, that birds take over again and we're back in the age of dinosaurs, where they really do sort of take over all the niches that we're occupying now.
Oh, Laura Dern was so close to being correct.
Yeah.
My favorite fictional paleontologist.
Yeah.
You had another good, I obviously am a fan of the foamy beer glass analogy, but in the book you also mention that looking at in reference to sort of things like conservation biology or even just modern ecology, which I do some of as well, so I'm not like talking outside school here, I hope. Mm-hmm. You say that it's like reading only the last sentence of a book and claiming to understand what's in the rest of the library.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my education was until the last decade or so when I really got into this stuff is, in high school you have to take AP American history, and to most Americans, history basically starts in 1776 and everything before it's a little fuzzy.
I mean, that is when the Hamilton album starts, and that's about all I need.
Right. And it's been shocking just talking to, otherwise really well-educated people when they ask what my book's about. I'll make the mistake of diving into the weeds right off the bat. And then I'll get this impression from them that they think that woolly mammoths and dinosaurs, there's all sort of at the same time, just back then sometime. So it really is amazing the sort of remedial education that I needed and that most people need about Earth history. And people after reading the book will say, I can't believe I never learned any of this stuff. And I actually don't understand why in high school you're made to memorize, it's important, but like rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum and all these things that just are rote learning that sort of squash people's natural curiosity and interest in science. Because I feel like I wanted to write a book that I had wished I'd read in high school. And I think it might have changed my career path because I've become so obsessed with this stuff in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that way about my own high school education. I think I got pretty lucky in having at least a few teachers who were willing to let me explore my imagination a little bit. But on the whole, it was, like you said, mostly rote memorization and kind of pounding it into the skull that way. I will say that I've been hugely, hugely impressed when I've judged local science fairs for high school students lately. And I work with a science camp that only takes recently graduated high school seniors. Mm-hmm. And there's some really bright kids out there right now.
Oh, so,
I'm kind of blown away.
I've stepped into some high school classes and I'm just in awe. I was not even close to as smart as the kids that I talked to in high school today.
I've given lectures at this particular science camp, and I kind of run into the problem you were joking about with GSW, where like I have an hour to give this lecture, but even then I almost run long and have to like skip over things. And so I skip over the things that I think they're not going to care about. So when I'm talking about stable isotopes, I'm like, and I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of how this mass spectrometer works or how these isotopic equilibria, discriminate based on the physiochemistry of the reactions. I want to talk about like the ecology and the dietaries and the sloths and all that stuff. And then I swear I got a question where the kid raised his hand and went, you really glossed over the physiochemistry of the chemical reactions there. You want to go back and cover that a little bit more clearly? And I was like,
yeah, the good parts.
And I'm like, I can't imagine giving this lecture to actual other scientists in my field and having them care about that. And yet here's this like kid who just graduated from high school, young adult, asking me very directly to cover that to his satisfaction, which I was happy to attempt. But
right.
Yeah, that's really cool. Speaking of things that I was really into in high school, and still, I'm not going to lie, your book actually made me reevaluate a pet peeve of mine when it comes to the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. And it's that every planet only has one ecosystem.
Yes.
But you kind of paint a picture that at times Earth only had one giant ecosystem.
What time is this? The like Permian or something?
Yeah, where it was like super arid and extreme continentality and like no ice caps.
Yeah. But I completely agree with you on the Star Wars thing, and I actually want to write an essay timed for the release of the next Star Wars movie, sort of walking through why every Star Wars planet would be a complete disaster, because it is just one.
I think Hoth works, right? You can just have an ice ball.
Okay, so here's my speculation about Hoth, which is that it's basically it's snowball Earth. Like, there are mountain ranges in Hoth, right?
Yeah.
So that means that there's plate tectonics.
Yeah.
Wait, how did this work? Let me think about this.
The problem is that some of the planets that the rebels operate on are moons of gas giants, not orbiting a star directly. So could the tectonics, or what seem like tectonics, be the result of gravitational forcing from the planet they're orbiting much closer?
Right. Oh, here's the thing about Hoth. It has mountain ranges, so it has tectonics. So there is, presumably there's CO2 going out into the air, and it's in an intermediate stage between going into a hothouse planet where all the ice will melt away, just like it did at the end of periods in Snowball Earth. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I'd buy that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like Tatooine it's got two suns. It's in a binary star system. It's pretty hot. I can get on board with that. It's when it's like the entire planet's a jungle, like a Dagobah situation, where I think it really falls apart. Or a Naboo. I don't know what's going on with Naboo. Why is the gravity not different? They say it's a small moon in the crawl of episode 1.
Well, so Tatooine. All right, let's go through these. Tatooine.
Doing the big work.
Tatooine, it seems like it has a magnetosphere because people are walking around.
True.
Which means that there's some sort of dynamo active mantle core situation, right?
Yeah.
Which probably implies that it would have this Venus stagnant lid planetary resurfacing thing every once in a while that would kill everything on the planet, right?
Yes, I buy that.
Okay, and Dagobah is a carbon cycle like nightmare.
Well,
Also,
Go ahead.
if I'm overstepping my bounds here as a journalist making these scientific speculations, please stop.
No, I think you're good. To me, Dagobah is like what science fiction writers in the 50s and 60s thought was going on under Venus.
Right, yeah. It's the, what did Carl Sagan say? There's clouds and we can't see anything underneath it, therefore dinosaurs.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there are very terrestrial looking reptiles on Dagobah, which always also flummoxed me as a child. Like, why is a boa constrictor on Dagobah?
But I actually brought this up to Peter Ward, who I interview in the book, and I chatted with him about some of these Star Wars planets. And if it was just a swamp where things were dying and it was a planet-wide swamp, it would be totally anoxic and creating hydrogen sulfide, and would probably get really cold really quickly because your bearings. It would be like the Carboniferous, but there's no ocean.
I think that's why Yoda looks like that.
Okay.
He doesn't look healthy. Like, it doesn't look good. He's very confused that, like, Luke is tall because he eats food regularly.
Yeah, right.
but actually, no, like, I think your book actually makes the case that Star Wars does represent a more realistic portrait of the galaxy, because you can have these planets where one type of ecosystem is dominant for a period that on human timescales it looks, stable or in stasis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I also really liked your idea of sort of how we today, with our interconnectivity and our shipping lanes and our air travel and all this other stuff, have created this artificial biological Pangea.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why invasive species are such a big problem. The problem with making a network global society partitioned by borders, and at the same time kicking off potentially extreme climate change, is that people will want to cross those borders, and that's where I think the major threat of climate change is. Plants will be hindered by our road building and coastal development, but for the most part, they're going to be freer to move up and down across continents, more so than people. And I think the biggest challenges of the next century are going to be geopolitical. The fact that we've created these artificial lines on continents, and yeah.
That sort of led me to a point that I think is more of a big picture idea in the book, is that in your mind, or based on the research you did in writing the book, there's some distinction between a mass extinction caused by life and a mass extinction caused by geology. And to you, is that a meaningful distinction between the abiotic and the biotic mass extinctions?
I don't think so. Yeah, so for instance, the Devonian, I think, might be what you're referring to, and the Ediacaran and Cambrian, which seems like it was mass extinction caused by ecosystem engineering by burrowers and filter feeders. But in the Devonian, you have the evolution of land plants and trees, which I like to think of as sort of this giant geoengineering project where suddenly plants and trees are spreading across the continent, and they're breaking up rock, and they're releasing all this phosphorus and creating soils, and that's washing into the oceans and causing these big anoxic zones by fueling big algae blooms. And I see what we're doing as analogous to sort of the trees in the Devonian. I think that's sort of the best case scenario for our future, is that, we have this sort of period when we first show up on the planet where it takes a while for the planets and ecosystems and ourselves to adjust to this new phenomenon on the planet. But eventually we learn to live in concert with ecosystems. But there is this sort of riotous period of mass extinctions right at the beginning. And I'm hoping that, humans and human technology are this new phenomenon on the planet that obviously is causing lots of disruptions, but that we're in our infancy and we're going to learn to live responsibly on the planet for hopefully millions of years or something like that. That's the best case scenario. And the worst case scenario is that, we're more like an asteroid, like the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, and that we're just going to be this complete blip and do ourselves in and do everything else in. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's...
No, you did. The Devonian,
Okay.
The Devonian extinction, that and the Ordovician, those were like the two trippiest extinctions for me in the book. Because the Devonian is like this weird pulsating trees slowly working their way into the interior, whereas like the Ordovician, that idea that when you're a world of island continents, there's nowhere to escape to, that was just dark.
Yeah. So people, I've like gotten the question, which mass extinction are we most like? And my mind changes on that every single day, because one of the explanations for the Ordovician, the earliest mass extinction 445 million years ago, is that you have all these sort of island continents, and when climate changes, things can't migrate to track their preferred temperature ranges. And in the same way that we're fragmenting habitat today, and if the temperature changes, that things are going to have a difficult time tracking their preferred temperatures. So that's a analogy. And then the Devonian, there's these trees that is this new thing on this new biological innovation on Earth that is really disrupting the planet's geochemical cycles. And then the Triassic and the Permian, it's very similar to us because it's just this gigantic injection of CO2 into the atmosphere from large igneous provinces. And then I guess the Cretaceous is it's the most used and maybe the least apt analogy to human civilization. People always say that we're the asteroid, but I think we're more of a large igneous province or a Devonian tree.
That's a great sentence, and I think that sentence will make way more sense if people go and read your book.
Okay. I'm probably not making any sense at all. So.
No, you are. Well,
Okay.
To me at least, and it's my show. So,
Okay.
Speaking of being a thing that releases some CO2, I think it's high past time that I asked you, what are you drinking?
I am drinking...
See what I did there? Because beer, it's carbonated,
Yeah.
It's got CO2 in it.
Yeah, and this is probably why I've gotten less coherent over the course of these 20 minutes. I'm drinking my favorite beer on planet Earth, which is Copper Kettle Brewing Company, based in Aurora, Colorado. They make this thing called Mexican Chocolate Stout, and it's brewed with chilies, chocolate, and spices. And it doesn't even taste like beer. It tastes like the best mole you've ever had, but carbonated.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Believe it or not, I'm also having a beer with chocolate in it.
Oh, wow.
I think. Yes. So I'm having, I got a beer that I was specifically tailoring to our conversation. So this is from Off Color Brewing, which is in Chicago, Illinois. And the beer is called Dino S'mores.
Ooh.
And it is a Russian Imperial Stout brewed with natural flavors with cacao nibs added.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, my wife's a big fan of s'mores. So whenever I see a s'more flavored thing, I'll usually snag it.
Well, mine I like to think is somewhat topical because they have this little cheesy origin story on the side, and they say they're inspired by the ancient Maya. And there's an interesting Maya angle to the dinosaur extinction.
Well, yeah, because the crater is there.
Yeah, not only the crater is there, but if you plot the Mayan settlements, it makes a 110-mile ring that crowds around the crater. So Walter Alvarez actually was one of the first people to notice this, that basically the Mayans sort of unwittingly discovered the crater 1,000 years before modern science did. And that's because it's this structure that's buried deep under the Yucatan Peninsula, and it's been covered by limestone over the last 60 million years. But there are these limestone sinkholes called cenotes, which provide fresh water where settlements popped up. And they pretty accurately track the concentric rings of the dinosaur asteroid crater. So
that's awesome. Well, so in the book, you go to the Yucatan. Did you get to dive into any of the cenotes?
I went swimming in one of them. Yeah, it was pretty amazing, and it was right next to a Mayan temple where they worshipped a feathered serpent god, which I just thought was sort of amazing and evocative. That was the local god was something that sounded very similar to a dinosaur.
Well, isn't Quetzalcoatlus the largest pterodactyloid to ever live? That might be an Aztec.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But that might actually be an Aztec god, not a Mayan god. So
right.
I don't want to get that wrong, but I believe Quetzalcoatl was also a feathered serpent god from a Mesoamerican culture.
Right. And I went to Chicxulub itself, which is this little beach town on the coast.
Yeah, that section of the book, I was deeply, deeply looking at Google Maps. Like every time you mentioned shifting from one town to another, I was like, I got to see where this is so I can mark it and make mental notes for my own travels.
Yeah, they have this hilarious little memorial in the town center that says 60 million years ago, a 10-kilometer rock hit here and has some little stucco dinosaurs in it. So I paid my respects there.
How does one pay their respects? What's the appropriate genuflection? Is that the right word? I have no idea if that was the right word or not. It sounded good.
I think I did that. I think I genuflected.
All right. I don't think I said genuflected, but I appreciate you giving me the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so you bring up Chicxulub. Very glad you did because it's been in the news. But I think just factually, we can say that the KPG, the asteroid extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, is not the worst extinction.
Right.
Which sometimes I think throws people for a loop. But I think instead of asking just about extinctions in general, this is a very broad question, but do you have an opinion on what the most important event in the history of life on Earth was?
I think it was either the Permian mass extinction, the Cambrian explosion, or the first, the first thing that fits the definition of a life, I guess, something that
I think you have to
follows Darwinian evolution.
I think the origin of life doesn't count because it can't be an important event in the history of life. You have to have life first. But I was thinking, I was leaning towards Cambrian explosion, and I was kind of curious if that made your cut as well. I think.
Well, when I interviewed this guy John Payne at Stanford, and he said if there's two events in the history of life, it's the Cambrian explosion and the Permian mass extinction. And I think that might be a Phanerozoic biased answer, but I think those are two good candidates. I'm starting to become more obsessed with Snowball Earth recently. I'm hoping to write a feature article about Snowball Earth because it's pretty wild.
What period of time are we talking about with Snowball Earth?
You have the Cambrian explosion when you get the sort of birth of animal life, but it seems like there's this long fuse that was lit in the Ediacaran, the period right before it, where you have these big blobby, weird, sort of motionless animals.
Is this like the Burgess Shale stuff, or is
no? This is pre-Burgess Shale. So this is the first macroscopic stuff in the fossil record, like Dickinsonia and Rangiomorphs. But there's these weird like frond things that are living in the period before the Cambrian. But before that period, you have Snowball Earth, where the planet over the course of 60 million years goes in and out of the most extreme climate events in its entire history. And where before, for 4 billion years, you only have unicellular life, bacteria and archaea and protists and things like that. You go through the biggest episode of climate change in Earth history. And then right after that, you get big macroscopic fossils and then the Cambrian explosion not that long after that. And so it's a really active area in the research community is, A, why did Snowball Earth happen? And B, how did it basically launch the age of animals? So Snowball Earth might be my new tentative most important event in Earth history.
That's cool. Do you ever wonder, I wonder this a lot, do you ever wonder if life evolved and then immediately got wiped out and then evolved again? Like how many iterations did we go through before it stuck? Or is life really, really sticky and once you get it once, you're stuck with it? It's like a venereal disease. Which I guess it almost literally is because...
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if early on, at the very dawn of the first thing that was ever alive, there might have been a few experiments and one managed to went out and went on to become all the other life thereafter. But
well, and back then there was so much horizontal gene transfer. Like who's to say that life didn't evolve multiple times and then it all just kind of melded into something that worked?
Yeah. But I don't think like sometime in the Meso Proterozoic, there was some brief little flourishing of animal life that just then got wiped out. It seems like there's been
I'm thinking like early RNA chemical world sort of like blips and troughs, as things were still really chaotic and the solar system was kind of settling out and all these other things.
Right. Yeah.
I had kind of a weird thought while reading your book, and it's based on something specific. I won't tell you the specific example until after I've asked the question. So I'll ask the question and then we can get into some of the details. Are there any benefits to a mass extinction?
It depends whether you're taking the point of view of the subsequent survivors or not. Doug Irwin, this paleontologist at the Smithsonian who wrote a book on the end Permian mass extinction, elucidated for me all the reasons why this was the worst thing that's ever happened in the planet's history. Something like 90 to 96% of life on Earth goes extinct. And then he said, but on the other hand, it was the best thing that's ever happened in Earth is 20 to 30 million years later, you have the first true mammals, the first dinosaurs, the first crocodilians, modern coral reefs evolve. And so if you care about our modern world, the end Permian was this absolute windfall for us. But if you're more sympathetic to, big lumbering parasaurs or gorgonopsids, brachiopods, or all this Paleozoic fauna, then yeah, it was the biggest tragedy in Earth history. So I just as easily could have written a book about the biggest radiations in Earth history, and that probably would have been a sunnier book. But I do cover that in the book. But yeah, there's a flip side to all of these events where the worst things ever can also be the best things ever, depending on how you look at it.
Did you feel morbid working on this book? Like, did you go through like a goth phase? I did wonder about that while reading it.
Not really. I actually found it.
It's a lot of death.
Yeah, no, I actually found it comforting in a weird way. Because I think I went into the project sort of with this ecological gloom and doom sort of perspective on humanity in the next few centuries. And then you learn about what the planet's been through before. And it's seen a lot worse than us. And in a million years, everything's going to be fine. So when people, that's usually my stock answer where I say, people say, how do you not get depressed? And I say, well, maybe it's not consoling to you, but in a million years, everything's going to be fine. And it's just, yeah, thinking about geological time, it makes it easier to deal with like the headlines, which every time I log on to Twitter, it's easy to just lose your mind. But geology really forces you to pull back and view things in a way that, for me at least, has been weirdly reassuring.
Well, my answer to the benefit of mass extinctions is I do have one of those salt blocks from the Himalayas that you mentioned.
Oh yeah, nice.
They actually are really nice. My parents got it for me, and it is
yeah.
It's actually a really fun little cooking tool. I haven't ever done the thing where you like heat it up on the grill and actually cook stuff on it, but for seasoning things, it's pretty choice.
Yeah. So when I was in Salzburg last spring, there was a store that was just salt from the area, and I just sort of like hovered around the register for a while, deciding whether or not to tell them, go into this whole spiel about the Permian mass extinction and how this salt is actually from these evaporated seas from the worst moment in Earth history. But I ended up deciding I didn't want to ruin their day, and I just walked out of the store. But yeah.
You might not have ruined their day. I mean, at least they would know what the word spiel meant.
That's true, yeah.
And if they're a Werner Herzog style German person, they would probably appreciate that gloom and doom perspective on their small business.
Yeah, and I would actually love Werner. If you know the contact info for him, I'd love to have him do the movie version of my book.
Okay, well,
he's the right person for it.
Anyone listening, if anyone out there has an in with the Herzog, please let us know. Or even a Paul F. Tompkins impression of Werner Herzog, I think might be sufficient.
Oh yeah, that could do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess okay. Another very broad question, as we sort of start to maybe wrap things up. What were the biggest surprises to you while you were researching the book?
I think the biggest surprises to me, which won't come as a surprise to anyone in your audience who's a geologist or a paleontologist, is kind of the revelation to me that, you don't have to go into the middle of nowhere to find amazing geology or paleontology. In my book, I highlight places like Cincinnati and Cleveland and Boston and under Dulles Airport, these places where there are these incredible paleontology finds, where I had always sort of been taught that, you have to go out to the middle of nowhere into a desert to find the Morrison Formation, and that paleontology was this thing about, going off the map and having these sort of Indiana Jones adventures. But that if you look up the bedrock that's underneath your feet and you learn the story about your local geology, you're just transported to this science fiction planet that has nothing to do with, what that location's like today. And so for me, it was just this eye-opening, like, reframing of everything I see. Now, whenever I go to a city I've never been to, or, I go on vacation, the first thing I do is I look up the bedrock, because there's always this crazy story about it. So I just came back from a wedding in Minnesota, and I pulled out my Rocked app, ROCKD, on my phone and looked up the local bedrock, and just spent the entire wedding boring people about Ordovician limestone, because that's what we're standing on. So that was the most eye-opening thing for me.
So it wasn't that geologists like eating rocks.
Actually, it was that geologists like eating rocks, and that they drink more than anyone else I've ever met, which maybe I shouldn't be promoting that, but
no, I mean, we put a drinking segment. We put a drinking segment in our show. I don't think any of our listeners will be surprised to learn that Earth scientists enjoy a beverage from time to time.
Yeah, right. I thought journalists were bad until I went to my first GSA.
Yeah, you should try a strictly paleontology conference.
Oh boy,
I think they might be worse. I guess I should say we might be worse. I have a theory about geology drinking, actually.
I'd love to hear it.
When I was an undergrad, I did a lot of training in biology and in geology, because I was trying to be a paleontologist at a university that didn't have a paleontology degree. So I had to learn both schools of thought as best I could, and then try to kind of combine them into a cohesive worldview. And so when I was doing field work with biologists, it was less fun because, end of the day, darkness sets in, and you want to just hang out and have a beer, but there's always some biologist who's like, no, I got to get up at 3:15 because that's when the moth I'm studying will breed.
Right.
Whereas with geologists, it's like, oh, the sun's set. Oh, well, guess we have to wait for the sun to come back.
Yeah.
Good thing the rocks are still there tomorrow. And so it's, there's no, because of that deep time perspective, there's no rush. And so it just lends itself to a more relaxed vibe where it's like, let's get the campfire. And you're and like you said, even though you don't have to go into the middle of nowhere, so much of geology training does involve that. And I mean, there's a whole discussion to be had there about accessibility and all these other things. Right. Historically, you do go do these field sites in the middle of nowhere to do your geology training, if only because you need the rocks exposed.
Right.
And that's hard to do in a city or a suburb or a place that's densely vegetated. And so, the sun goes down, the rocks are going to be there tomorrow, so you'd get the fire going, somebody pulls out an acoustic guitar, you have a couple of beers, and that's just sort of the cultural vibe. And, I can't think of another science where that's the way it goes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
As the day-to-day field experience. So it's not a perfect system. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying I think that's an explanation of it.
Right.
Yeah. But geologists do love putting rocks in their mouth, and I have found that to be a very surprising thing to many people who don't have geology training.
Well, so I made the mistake in the hardcover. I made the joke about how, we went to this place and someone asked, who brought acid? And I say, oh, but they don't use it. It's not what you think. Mm-hmm. And then I gave the totally wrong explanation for why actually geologists bring acid to outcrops. And that was what I heard. That's what I get the most emails from, just outraged geologists.
I think I did catch on that, but I wasn't going to bring it up here.
Yeah, it's a sensitive subject.
So read the book, and then based on that, I read the digital copy, so I didn't know if I got the hardcover or the softcover version, but I did remember catching on that, but it didn't even make my notes of things to talk to you about. That's how little I was worried.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Your book sort of walks through a lot of kind of out there ideas about how these extinctions may or may not have occurred. Mm-hmm. As a journalist, when you're talking to scientists, do you ever think to yourself, this is such an outlandish idea, or maybe this is so overinterpreted that I want to call them out, but I want to also be the guy who's reporting the story faithfully? Where does your journalistic smell test kind of register compared to other types of journalism where fact checking is an easier thing to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was tough in that there is such an incredible diversity of theories for a lot of these mass extinctions.
And some pretty fiery debates.
Oh, extremely fiery debates. And so I tried to sort of, to the best of my ability, sort of find out what the consensus was today when you go to a conference. What were most people talking about? and sort of put the weight of my narrative on those theories. But yeah, it was a huge challenge. And I was shocked to the extent to which I sort of thought I would go into this and I would interview scientists and they would tell me what happened. And I very quickly learned that it was not nearly that tidy. And there was a lot of storytelling, and it was tough to tell, what was just someone's wild speculation off the hip and what was a pretty well supported theory. I remember walking into someone's office and talking about the Endivonian, and he started drawing up these weather patterns and on a map he had drawn of Devonian paleogeography, being like, well, the monsoons would have been going this way, so that would have. And I was just thinking, like, we don't even know what during the last glacial maximum, we're trying to figure out what the sort of weather systems were like. And he's just saying this mass extinction was caused because there were these, westerlies blowing in and bringing in all this, hydrogen sulfide or something like that. So it did take some sniffing out to try and figure out what someone was just sort of making up, because a lot of these events are so shrouded by deep time that sometimes you do just get a few data points and have to tell a story around it. And in the book, I sort of try to plant flags where this is something that, this might be just speculation, but here's what the hard data is. We have, pyrite framboids or something in the fossil record, which proves that there was, anoxia in the ocean. So we do know that that was the case in this part of the world. But yeah, no, it was a learning experience for me that if you go back far enough in time and the fossil record gets sketchy enough, you can just sort of make up your own adventure, I guess.
And speaking of making up our own adventure, towards the end of the book, you sort of walk through how unlikely it is that we humans ever would have evolved in the first place. Maybe this is too out there, and feel free to reject the premise of the question, but does that change your perspective on whether or not we're alone in the universe, or is that?
No, I sort of started to think this way where, I kept encountering this phrase, if it had with the Permian mass extinction or the, or snowball Earth, or if the KT impactor had been a little bigger, that we wouldn't be around here. We wouldn't be around to talk about it. And I started to wonder, is it just luck that these things weren't a little bit worse and that we're around? Or is it the fact that we wouldn't be around if they had been a little worse? And if there's lots of worlds in the universe that, and most of them get wiped out by these sort of mundane catastrophes that are expected to be bad enough that they would exterminate life, did we survive them because we're lucky, or because we could only ever wake up on a planet that has sort of miraculously survived all these catastrophes? And I was shocked to find that there are actually people with salaries at universities who just think of this stuff all day, particularly at Oxford. I talk to people who just think about the anthropic principle all day long, which is what I was sort of just describing, probably not very well. And they've done these calculations on, are we lucky necessarily so because the universe is actually an incredibly dangerous place and we're incredibly unlikely to be here, but we can only ever wake up on incredibly unlikely planets. And so, yeah, I mean, whenever I'm asked to describe this stuff, I start getting tripped up because it's so sort of heady and such a strange way to think about the world. But it has, when I was like a little kid, I was obsessed with aliens and space, and
same.
I used to wonder what was under the ocean in Europa and think, oh, there might be stuff living underground in Mars. But the more I've studied Earth history, the more I've come to think of this planet as just sort of a complete one-off miracle, at least in the closest 1,000 light years or something. I don't think I'm sure there's alien life if you go out there far enough, but I think that the Earth is so well suited for life that we're pretty unlikely to find it anywhere nearby.
So it's an empty neighborhood.
I think so. I subscribe to the rare Earth hypothesis.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then obviously I really enjoyed reading the book. I encourage everyone to go out there and read it. I read it because I met you, but I also know that Callum Bentley, former president of the Geological Society of Washington, also read the book, and that was one of the reasons he wanted you to come out and give a talk. I don't know if you knew that. So really a fantastic, easy to read book about some of the worst things that have ever happened. And when I say ever, I mean literally ever. It's not an overstatement. But from your perspective, if there is a take-home message to the book, or if there's one thing that you want readers to go away thinking about or having a deeper appreciation of, what would that sort of message be?
There's a quote after the first major mass extinction that I talk about, the Endordivision mass extinction, where I'm talking to, I think it's Matthew Saltzman at Ohio State, and he says, whenever there's a major disruption in the carbon cycle, things don't end well, basically. I think is something like what his quote is. And I think that's sort of the take-home message of the book, is that we're now starting to pull these levers of these systems that Earth history is doing its best to sort of instruct us that we really shouldn't be messing with. That, you know, everything up until now, the way we've sort of been a negative influence on the environment has been through direct hunting and habitat fragmentation and overfishing and things like that, which if we relaxed for 10 years, I think nature is so resilient that would have bounced back in a major way. But the threats for the coming decades, where we're going to be messing with the carbon cycle in a major way, it's pretty clear from a lot of these mass extinctions that we really shouldn't be doing that, because, you know, if you pull these levers hard enough, it can end in a mass extinction. So that's not a great take-home message. It's not a very happy one, but I think we only have a few decades really to turn the ship around. So I was sort of just trying to illuminate what the stakes exactly are, because I think people need to know that before we act on it.
So we had James Baylog on the show a couple episodes ago. It was great talking to him and his perspective. But one of the last questions I asked him, and I'll ask you as well, is, do you have hope?
I do. I don't think RCP 8.5, I don't think the worst case scenarios for climate change are going to happen. I think it's going to be like I don't know, because there are major warming events in Earth history, like the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum, where you don't end up in a mass extinction. And we're still a long way from the end Permian, where something like 90% of life on Earth goes extinct. So I think the most thorough treatment of this question of whether about the sixth mass extinction was by Anthony Barnowski at UC Berkeley, who wrote this paper, Has Earth's Sixth Mass Extinction Arrived? And I feel like a lot of the treatment of that in the press was sort of obviously, yes, it has. But the paper was more subtle than that. And it made the point that, well, rates, if we keep them up for centuries to millennia, we could actually be in the same conversation as the end Cretaceous or the end Permian or one of these outrageous events. That, you know, of assessed species, we're still we're in the single digits in terms of extinction, which is encouraging. You know, the world hasn't ended yet. And I think there's a risk of people reading a lot of these headlines and thinking, oh, it's too late, what's the point? But this is the most important time to be alive, because there's still a chance to fix things. But he notes in that paper as well that while it's encouraging that there's still so much biodiversity, that avoiding the worst outcomes will require reversing so many of the threats and the ongoing threats to biodiversity that are going on today. Just we need to reverse all these incredibly worrying trends. But yeah, reading that recent UN report where 1 million species are going to go extinct in the next century or so if we don't do anything, this stuff is all super bleak and it's really scary. But you read about the Earth's ancient mass extinctions, and it's still a long way to go until the end of the world. And it's going to be a matter, just like climate change, of degree. We're going to let it get worse or worse or worse or worse. And I think if we intervene in the next few decades, and I'm encouraged, again, like we were talking earlier about how exciting it is talking to high schoolers, how smart they are. I'm incredibly encouraged by sort of like polling trends and things like that. And
yes, I think it's easy to say we're encouraged by young people, maybe not other age brackets of people.
Yeah.
Not naming any names here, but
yeah, the boomers got to go. That's my moral.
You have a quote in the book that I think hit me pretty hard. And it was, if it's actually true we're in a sixth mass extinction, then there's no point in conservation biology. Like, that's how bad mass extinctions are.
Right. Yeah. So that's from Doug Irwin, who thinks that mass extinctions play out like power grid failures, where the ecosystems are just sort of taking a beating for a while, but it's not game over yet. And then all of a sudden you get this network collapse where, in the case of power grid failures, the whole eastern seaboard goes out because of some software glitch in Ohio. And it could be similar with mass extinctions, where you're sort of bumbling along and you're wiping out habitat and things like that, but you haven't lost that many species. But then you could cross this point of no return that's sort of like an event horizon of a black hole, where you don't even realize you went past it, but there's just this complete network collapse after that. And so given that that could be the case, that there could be tipping points in the future, so that was excerpted. That was one of the first things excerpted from the book. And it got me in a lot of trouble because it said the sixth mass extinction hasn't happened yet. And, ecologists and conservation biologists were saying, how dare you say this? Like, of course it's happened. But it was actually a message sort of driving home the urgency of this, where, once the mass extinction gets going, there might be no way to stop it. And given that we don't know where that tipping point is, it's extra urgent that we, stop inflicting as much damage as we are on the biosphere. So there was a headline on that was very inflammatory that obviously, editors write the headlines. But I
actually don't think that's obvious. You say that's obvious as a journalist.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a thing everyone knows about headline, is that usually the journalist who writes the story does not also get to write the headline. So,
yeah, right. Yeah.
It's worth pointing out that like the person generating the actual content doesn't always get to say what the headline is.
Yeah, right. So the headline was like the 6 mass extinctions garbage. And like, that wasn't my point. My point was that you don't want to get it started because
the point is we should be even more scared of it.
Exactly.
Tony, Anthony Barnofsky, I call him Tony, in his book Heat Stroke has, I think, my favorite analogy about this sort of idea of tipping points, where he talks about being in a canoe, and how you can rock a canoe pretty far side to side without tipping over. But
right.
Once you tip over, you create a new steady state where the canoe is now tipped, and it takes way more effort to get the canoe right side up again, if you can at all.
Right.
Would have if you just didn't tip it over in the first place.
Yeah. So I mean, the reason why Doug Irwin thinks they play out this way is because in the end Permian, for instance, the Siberian Traps, this huge volcanic province in Russia, it was humming along for 300,000 years, and then in only a few thousand years, everything on the planet dies. So it could be an indication of exactly this thing, that the planet was pushed to the edge and then went over this tipping point.
Well, I think that's a great sort of way to end the thinking about the book in just terms of things are bad, things could get worse, but there's still hope and there's still things we can do. Since we talked a little bit about sort of the journalistic perspective, I do want to ask you, and this is something I've been trying to ask journalists and science communicators more generally, do you have any tips or tricks or just general advice that you would want our listeners who are consumers of science media or scientists themselves who are trying to interact in a positive way with science journalists, what they can learn from you and your experiences, how to best work within journalism and media to get a positive outcome?
I think just my advice for science communication in general, if it's scientists trying to get their message out, or it's science journalists trying to translate that message to a general audience, is that you should never talk down to your listener or to your reader. That you have to imagine that the person you're talking to is someone who just happens to not know a fact that you know, basically. I haven't seen it as much recently, but I tear my hair out every time I read a science article that is pitched as if it's written for like kindergartners or something. And so the example I always go back to is, I remember I got this press release in my inbox about, I think it was about like fish chemical signaling to each other. And the headline was like, it's like the Facebook for fish. And it's like, this doesn't appeal to anyone. You're just talking down to people. And this is horrible. This is just bad messaging. It's bad communication. That I think people are naturally curious about science, and to take advantage of that natural curiosity, you don't have to talk down to people. And in my writing, that's something that I try to follow, that I think people like to get pushed actually to like sort of the edge of what they're comfortable with, where they like learning about new technical concepts and things like that. So I know that goes against the grain of like every single SciComm 101, thing you hear, but
not this podcast, baby.
Okay.
Because we are all about just like, use that technical term. Don't worry, we will cut you off and ask you to explain it if we think it's
exactly. Yeah.
Because like
when you're
it's just like explain it and then move on.
Yeah.
But talk the way you talk and communicate the way you communicate, and people will be, I agree with you. I think people will be encouraged to rise to the challenge of understanding, as long as you don't aggressively leave them in the dust. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, there's a way to be too extra.
Yeah.
That's not good either. But like, I agree with you that the needle should be pushed in the direction of like, maybe you need to look up a term from time to time. I look up words all the time. Just reading like novels, I'm looking up words because I want to know what they mean when they're used properly.
Well, what was funny is that a common complaint about my book, and it only came from old people, is like, I didn't know what this animal looked like, and I could never find out. and it's just like someone in our generation would just instantly go to the computer and like Google and find out what it looks like. But they were frustrated that
I think that means that there's a market for the graphic novel version of Ends of the World.
I agree.
All right. I know we have people who are into comics listening to the show because that's one of my passions, and I know we've got some of my fanboy listeners who check out the show from time to time. So if any of you are illustrators or interested in doing a full feature length, full color, let's just say it, graphic novel of Ends of the World, let's get in touch.
That would be great. Also, I'm sorry I said bad stuff about boomers and even older people. I have nothing against you, and you're wonderful. And most of my talks have been to a white-haired crowd, so that's probably most of my readership, so I didn't mean to offend anyone.
I'm going to revive a very old joke for the show, but please send all your complaints to jacob@sciencesortof.com. one of our beloved former co-hosts of the show that we direct all hate mail to.
Great.
His email account is still active. I don't know if he still receives the emails, but you can just Jacob@sciencesortof. He'll forward them to Peter. No problem there. So Peter, what is next? I know, getting a book out the door and promoting it and continuing to promote it is a big ask, and you've got lots of things going on with your position at Scripps right now, but sort of if people are following along, what can they look forward to in the future? I'm
hoping to have a bunch of sort of essays and magazine stories coming up this summer. And then I'm hoping to write another book. But at this point, my thoughts are pretty half-baked on that, and I haven't worked out my elevator pitch. So that's still under wraps. But it's going to be in the same vein, sort of what we can pull away from the fossil record and geological history and what it can teach us about our future. So it's going to be in a similar vein, but in a slightly different direction. So that's all I can say at this point. But I mentioned Snowball Earth a lot in this episode, and that's because I'm working on a feature magazine article about Snowball Earth and sort of why people think it might have launched the age of animal life. So I usually start my book talks by writing off the first 4 billion years of Earth history as basically the boring billions, plural. And I've been coming around to the fact that maybe they weren't so boring. So I'm starting to see the light about the Proterozoic.
Well, that's awesome. Well, looking forward to that, and hopefully, as you're ready to talk about either articles or new book announcements or the book itself, we hope you keep us in mind for coming back on the show and giving us an update.
Oh, my next essay is going to be about why the Anthropocene is really stupid. So that's going to ruffle some feathers.
Let's go ahead and open my calendar, see if we can get you booked for a future appearance, because I am openly very critical of the Anthropocene and have been on record on this show. So if you need a quote, I can give you a fresh one, or you can dig into the archives, or you just let me know what you need.
Wonderful.
Because I get real salty about that one.
Okay, good.
Pull out the salt block for you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Your website?
PeterBrannen.com, but yeah, I post my stories there. So.
And Twitter, you're pretty active on Twitter as well.
Yeah, it's Peter Brannen 1, because there's someone named Peter Brannen who doesn't post anything and has like 2 followers, so I had to be 1, but it's all right.
First in our hearts.
Yep. Thank you.
Right. And so that I imagine, are those the 2 best ways for people to keep abreast of everything you're working on?
I think so.
Okay. Check those out. We will link to both of those in the show notes for this episode. And Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that was my interview with Peter. Hopefully you all enjoyed it and learned something. Peter was a great guest, and it sounds like he's working on really cool stuff for the future. So I can't imagine this will be the last time we hear from Peter. But I think now would be a good time to take it on over to a little segment we like to call the PaleoPOW.
Pow!
PaleoPOW is the segment of the show where we deal with feedback from you fine listeners. Now, Joe, when we do the long interview segments, we usually do the patron thesis at the end of this segment just so you and I have had more to discuss than just you listening all the way through to the interview, which you just did in real time, so I could make editing easier.
Yep,
and
definitely.
You and I each have a piece of feedback that's relatively recent from episodes. Do we want to start at the older episode and work our way forward, or start with the more recent episode and work our way back? What are you feeling?
Let's start in the past.
Okay. That means I'm going to go first. And I have an email from Joel S., who is, I do not believe this is the first time Joel has contributed, but we got to learn a little bit more about Joel, and I'm really excited. So this is in reference to episode 296, and I picked this email for you, Joe, because you now live in the Golden State.
I do.
That state of California. Now, when I lived in California, I lived in Santa Cruz. Some people call that Central California. I think that's ridiculous. It always felt very Northern California to me. I haven't spent nearly as much time in Southern California. Do you get the eucalyptus that far south? I know you're kind of inland, so you probably don't get them just based on being inland, but how far south did the eucalyptus go? Do you know?
So there was actually a story just this week in the LA Times about a bunch of eucalyptus trees down in, Orange County somewhere. There's a little island off the coast of, I think, Huntington Beach.
Oh, okay.
And they've got their main street is lined with these old eucalyptus trees, and it's Newport Beach. So on Balboa Island in Newport Beach, California, they've got this main street with a bunch of old eucalyptus trees on them, and they're all like old and dying. Mm-hmm. And so they're having a fight over how many of these trees they need to cut down and replant, and people are freaking out about it. So the answer is we've got them down here. Okay,
cool. So this is good. I was hoping, I did it for the California connection, but I wasn't sure if we talked about, in episode 296, we had Matt from Indefensive Plants on, and he and I talked about eucalyptus in California and the idea that they've been there long enough. Do we still consider them invasive, even though they make up such an important part of the forest at this point? It's kind of a tough discussion, but Matt's a plant guy, so I wanted to have that discussion. And I believe at one point I asked for feedback if there were any Aussies out there listening who could clue us in to what's their perspective from down under. I'm going to Australia, Joe, so I'm practicing.
No, you're going to have to keep practicing.
I'm practicing my accent. Hello!
Yep, okay. That's it. You nailed it.
Yes. Ready for Brexit.
Got it in one.
Okay, so Joel is actually from Tasmania, or lives in Tasmania now. I can't do a Tasmanian accent. I don't know if it's different than an Australian accent. I'm not going to risk it, so I'm just going to read this in my normal voice. Hello! No, hey, PaleoPOWs. I just listened to the latest episode and figured I would reply to your call for opinions from Tasmanians about the Tassie Blue Gum. Now, Tassie Blue Gum is a hard thing not to say with an Australian accent. I really just want to go Tassie Blue Gum. So I'm just going to say that.
Do it, man.
An invasive species in San Francisco. I imagine how they would say that. Tasmania has fairly strong plant and animal controls to protect the agricultural industry, as we don't have a bunch of the pests that are present in other parts of the world. However, this is the tip of the iceberg, really, as the state has a lot of people that some would refer to as greenies, and that's in quotes, which results in plenty of groups protecting the environment in lots of ways, including projects to remove invasive species from the bush around the state. Do they go on walkabouts to do that, I wonder?
Jeepabouts. They probably have like cool Land Rover Defenders.
Joel clarifies that the bush is the way that Aussies refer to forests. Now you know that. So I dare say most people with an opinion on the matter in Tassie would probably be pro the removal of the species from San Francisco. As a different follow-up, I very nearly wrote in a year ago or so when you had a segment on the Tasmanian devil face cancer. At the time, I was working up a project to work with the devils, specifically working on protection mechanisms for some of the insurance populations, although the funding fell through and didn't eventuate. Usual deal, approved by all of the scientists involved with the state government, but got canned by the higher-ups in political positions. But yeah, at the time, I was a bit busy with things, and then it fell through, so never emailed. There was something I had learned that was relevant to the episode, forgotten what it is, or forgotten what it was now, though. So that seems typical for our show.
Yeah, I mean, we've been there.
Keep up the great work. Love the show, Joel. And yeah, Joel is based in the University of Tasmania in Hobart, and I will not be going to Tasmania, unfortunately, for my trip. I will be going other places around the East Coast, including Melbourne. So the thing about cities names in Australia that I'm learning as I work on this trip, Joe, is just like ignore some of the letters in each city's name, but they don't tell you which letters to ignore.
Oh, is that a thing?
Yeah. I mean, it seems to be a pattern. We're going to what you and I would call Melbourne, but apparently you're supposed to say Melbourne. And I don't know where the R went. I don't know where the O went. The U got converted into an I somehow. Melbourne.
Well, Brisbane is like Brisbane, isn't it?
Yep. We're also going to Brisbane. And we're going to Cairns, which is spelled like the stack of rocks that you would see in a park.
Cairns.
Yeah. So you and I would say Cairns, like a rock cairn, but apparently it's Cannes, like the film festival in France.
All right.
I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I'm gonna go down under. I'm gonna do some investigating. I'm gonna figure this out, Joe. I'll report back.
All right, but you're not gonna go to Tasmania because it's not on the map.
I hadn't made plans to. I mean, I'd love to go see Joel. Sounds like a cool guy. Got lots of good info for us. But I think, I have to say I'm actually a little nervous. I've never been in that part of the world. I've never actually crossed the equator. Never actually made it to the southern hemisphere.
Really?
Yeah, I know.
All your sloth travels, you never made it across the equator?
I've only done Central American slothies. So
interesting.
I need to do this, but I'm actually a little nervous about it just because it's such a big trip. But I'm hoping that it's sort of a rip the Band-Aid off, and once I've done it once, I'll be like, oh yeah, going to Australia is great. I'll do it again, next month or whatever.
You were so close though. You were in Panama.
Yeah, but the Pan American Highway actually doesn't connect Panama and Colombia through the Darien, the region in the southernmost portion of Panama where it borders with Colombia. So I would have had to take a flight, and the weekend.
Oh yeah. Look at that. The road just ends.
Yep. And the weekend that I had available to do that trip, I went back up to Costa Rica instead because I hadn't been back to Costa Rica in a while and just felt like going somewhere I knew and was a little more comfortable with. So
fair enough.
Plus, I worked with some Colombians when I was in Panama, and I had a very hard time with their Spanish. So I was a little hesitant to go to a place where I wasn't sure my Spanish was gonna work for me, just because the Colombian accent I have a harder time with than the Costa Rican accent. So yeah,
I think you'll be okay in Australia as long as you don't mind being, having gravity upside down and stuff.
I thought I was going to be okay when I went to Ireland, and I had a hard time understanding a word of what those people were saying. So I've learned that just because the official language is English doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to have an easy go of it. But I've been practicing.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's so crucial that you can speak it so much as comprehend it.
I know that breakfast is called brekkie. And football, which we would call soccer, is called footy.
Right.
And I know they have their own version of football called Aussie rules football. And I know you don't say Australia, you just say Australia.
And they have utes.
Utes, yes. Pickup truck is a ute. I know that.
Very specifically, it's a car based.
And I'll tell you something else I learned that was actually a little disappointing. So when you say car based, you mean like an El Camino?
Yeah. That's a ute.
Okay. We are planning on doing some portions of this trip where we drive around. I say we because Julie's coming with me. So we are planning on driving around a little bit. So from what I understand, they drive on the left side of the road, but most of the cars have the steering wheel in the same place that American cars do.
No, they have right hand drive cars.
They do? Okay. And then most of them drive automatic, which was disappointing to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. At least that's what the car rental website, when I was putting
they might rent automatics because they don't trust people to drive a stick.
The car rental website, I had to fill out my because I had a profile on the website. They wanted me to put in my preferences for all these different regions around the world because I'd only put in my preferences for US and Canada. And so I had to go and select, if I travel to Europe, what, do I want a compact? Do I want economy? Do I want mid-size, full size? And for each of the regions, they said most people in this region drive manual. Most people in this region drive automatic. So they clarified.
Interesting.
You're right. Maybe they were just lying and that most of the rentals are automatic, but they made it sound like that most Australians drove automatic cars.
We're having a bad influence on them, I guess.
I know. I mean, I guess it's all going to be a moot point once everything's electric.
Yeah.
Which I kind of hope, so some electric cars have sound effects to make it sound like you're driving a vroom vroom gas guzzler.
Yeah.
So how hard would it be to build an electric car that lets you shift as if it was? Because, really, you just have to program it, right? To act like it's revving? Is that a thing? Am I crazy?
You could do that. It'd be dumb.
What if it was just to go to a track day?
Because like the cool thing about an electric car is that you put your foot down and it just pulls and pulls and pulls and pulls and doesn't stop pulling until it eventually runs out of juice.
All right.
Like it's a pretty cool feeling that you get out of an electric car accelerating. And it's different from a gas car because the gas car runs out of pull at the top of each gear, right?
Yeah.
An electric car just doesn't. It just keeps going until you get to like top speed.
Well, it'll be a non-issue when all cars are self-driven and electric anyway.
No, that's not going to happen.
No? We're not going to have self-driving cars?
Not for decades.
I want them real bad, though.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, though. I've been trying to convince Jacob not to buy a full self-driving Tesla because it'd be silly.
I know you pay more attention to this stuff than I do, but I don't believe you. Because I'm going to be a typical American and reject the opinion of experts.
Good,
Because in my mind, I'd been kind of thinking for a little while now that like once I have kids, I kind of would be surprised if I stay in a relatively urban setting, if my kids ever need to get a driver's license, because if you're in an urban setting, you don't need to drive as much anyway. But I hoped that by the time my kids were at that age, that most cars, or at least it would be possible to buy self-driving cars.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe, but that's like probably 20 years away, maybe a little less.
Okay. So
decades.
A little less. So like by the time my kids are 15, 16.
Maybe.
That's what I'm saying.
That's a long time. If you believe Elon, it's like next year.
I don't believe anything that guy says.
Good. Good call.
Okay, I can go jump in a lake for fun. I don't wish him
We've
ill.
come a long way from this week on Elon Musk's Twitter.
You've come a long way. I never thought that was a great segment. As the executive producer of this network, I was kind of like, I don't know, guys. Once I saw the clip of his, I don't believe it was his first wife, but the wife, the ex-wife of his, that is the actress who was on Westworld.
Yeah.
Once I saw the clip of the documentary about him where she's like trying to raise his kids from a previous marriage, and she like makes some joke about like, sometimes I think about just running off in the middle of the night, and you see in the documentary the look in her eyes that she is not kidding.
Right. Yeah.
Like you could just see because Elon just looks at her, gives her this look, death stare of like, why would you say that while the cameras are rolling? And then she just does. She's a fine actress on Westworld. This was not her best performance in this documentary because she just kind of goes, just kidding, honey.
Oh, that got dark.
Let's bring it back to the light with Chessie, our old friend Chessie.
Our old friend Chessie. Seems like just yesterday. So back on episode 312, we talked to Christina Gaddy about an article she wrote about Chessie, the supposed sea monster of the Chesapeake Bay. And we had a comment on our SoundCloud from Taylor, who says, super interesting and hilarious. Brings out my inner science nerd. Just finished listening to the episode about Chessie. Who knew? As a native Marylander, I did hear about Chessie growing up, kind of jokingly from my dad, who's a serious scientist. An interesting and enjoyable way to pass the time. So thanks, Taylor. Thanks for writing in. Glad you enjoyed the episode.
Yeah, and SoundCloud's weird because you can comment with a timestamp. So Taylor commented exactly at 51:31. So I don't know, like, I think that might have been when we finished talking with Christina and moved on to the PaleoPOW.
I can find out right now.
Because I put that in the show notes. Timestamps in the show notes. Yep, that's exactly. I predicted it correctly, I think. But yeah, great, very nice of Taylor to give us that comment, and the entire back catalog is on SoundCloud now. We're figuring out some of the other platforms, the Spotify's and stuff. We're on most of them, but what I would say is if you're listening to us one way, but you would prefer to listen to the show through another platform that we're not on, please reach out and let us know, and odds are we can figure out how to make that happen.
I would prefer you just come over and dictate the podcast to me.
One of our Patreon reward levels is getting the show transcribed, so we've been getting transcriptions.
Excellent.
And then you could presumably put that transcription into a text-to-voice app and have it dictated to you that way. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Is it going to have your voice as the dictation?
No, I don't. I mean, if Adobe releases that voice mimicking product to the public, which I don't think they've done yet, but Adobe has that. Have you seen this?
I mean, I've seen fakes of audio and video, and it's going to be a terrifying time.
This is just audio for now. The one Adobe did. There was a clip on YouTube with Jordan Peele where, because you need enough of the person speaking, obviously, to get there. But Jordan Peele was like hosting some tech event for Adobe or whatever, and they were demoing this product, and they had Jordan Peele say the sentence like, "I came home from work and kissed my wife and hugged my dog." And then they were like able to just completely delete, like they had the text of it underneath the waveform, and they were able to edit the text, and the waveform would match the edits they made to the text in almost real time, so that they were able to literally just delete the word, or like cut the word wife and paste it after hug, and cut the word dog and paste it after kiss. And then they played it, and it sounds like Jordan Peele saying, "I came home from work and I kissed my dog and hugged my wife." And like, it's pretty good. An expert in audio editing and engineering, like an Ira Glass, would probably be able to hear it be a little off, but like Jordan's reaction is pretty amazing because he flips out. And so it's fun to just watch his reaction to this technology. But I look forward to the day where I can literally just type what I want the show to be and then just hit run it, Adobe, and then it comes out the other side as a full episode of the podcast that I don't need to edit because I typed exactly what I wanted all of you to say, my little puppets. Ha ha ha.
Hello and welcome, ...
Our theme this week is...
Auto predict, just accept the rest of it from there.
Yes. So, Joe, who are we doing a Patreon thesis for this time?
This time, we're doing a Patreon thesis for Charles L.
Okay, what do we think Charles is into?
T-shirts.
We do know that. So Charles sent us a message to the Patreon because I mentioned at one point that I have a box of Science Sorta t-shirts from when we were selling t-shirts. It's the second generation of the t-shirts that Thomas designed for us. That's the logo that we had in between the original logo and the logo we're using now. So it's not quite the up-to-date logo, and we don't have any way to actually purchase them through the website right now.
Is it the green on?
Yeah, it's the gray on green. It's the gray t-shirt, green logo.
Yeah.
We are $50 away from getting some sort of merch back on the website on Patreon. So patreon.com/sciencesortative if you want to help us get to that goal. I realized, I was like, oh, we're only $50 away. That's a nice even number. And then I realized, because I'm an idiot, I made all of our actual sign up levels non-round numbers. So it's
Good.
So I can't just say like, we only need 5 more people at the $10 level because we don't have a $10
Oh, right.
level.
They're all like $6.62 or $3.14.
Yeah, I botched that one pretty hard. I think you could still sign up to give $10 a month if you want, but instead we have it at $9.80.
That much. Actually needs 6 of you.
So Charles messaged when I mentioned that I had some t-shirts in storage in episode 306. He said, if there are any t-shirts in large or extra large left, I would like to purchase one. So Charles, there are. I went down into the basement of the building and checked the box, and there are both large and extra large t-shirts left. I would say that the t-shirts, they're sort of the... I know it's no longer an active brand and was problematic even when it was, but they're more of the American Apparel fit and cut, so they probably run a little small, I'm guessing. So if you think you're on the verge of between large and extra large, you probably want to go extra large. But if anyone else wants me to go down into my basement and check the box of shirts, I could just inventory them and figure out how many we have of each size. But I kind of like my one at a time method. It's just funnier. It's just funnier that way. So, Charles, happy to sell you a shirt. You gave me your email, so I will message you this as well when the episode comes out. But I also thought it would just be funny to do on air as we gave you your thesis. So Charles is into t-shirts. We talked about extinctions. I've got a dog on my lap named Charlie. I don't know if that's right. No, I don't want to talk about her going extinct.
Yeah, no. How about the extinction of sleeves on t-shirts?
What about like some sort of like competition between V-necks and crew necks?
Okay.
Competitive exclusion.
Yeah, and one just survival of the fittest its way out.
Which one do you think? Because I feel like...
I mean, it's got to be the V-neck, right? That's going to die.
Really? I feel like V-necks are rising in popularity.
It's a fad. crew necks were here to begin with. Crew necks will be here forever.
You think?
I don't know. Global warming, man. Who knows? Maybe we're going to need that extra cooling from the V-neck.
Maybe Charles did something with like the phylogeny of different kinds of shirts in general. So like when did men's blouses go extinct, or are there still refugia populations?
Refugia populations of t-shirts.
That's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah. And there's that one kid in England who still makes like super old school clothing. He's keeping it alive. He's like the zoo for t-shirts, for old men's blouses.
I don't know. I mean, maybe we're barking up the wrong tree to make Charles all about t-shirts. Or shirts in general.
Probably.
I'm not against it, but I don't want to pigeonhole Charles like that.
I mean, he should have told us something about himself.
That's a fair point.
We got extinctions, we got t-shirts, we got Tasmania.
And Chessie.
Chessie.
Let me see if I...
All right, we got Chessie and Tasmanian devils, although Tasmanian devils are real things.
Definitely an animal that sounds like it's made up.
Yes. And was cartoonized.
And the cartoon looks nothing like the real ones.
Yeah. Was there a cartoon Chessie? I mean, there is on that coloring book.
Yeah. What was episode 306 about, where I mentioned having shirts? That was The World Without Us. Okay. There's a theme emerging.
Oh, more extinction. We talk about extinction a lot, I guess.
Well, it's almost as if there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere right now.
Yeah.
What about the carbon footprint of t-shirt manufacturing? Could V-necks stop global warming because they use slightly less material than a cargo? I like that. Do you like that?
I'm into it.
Okay.
Reduction, impact
carbon
of
footprint analysis of t-shirt types could reduced fabric.
So we need to throw in something about a deep V.
Needs of deep V t-shirts.
Deep V, Urban Dictionary. It's a V-neck, usually worn by hipsters and douchebags. Love it.
Could reduce fabric needs of deep V t-shirts significantly minimize... All right, what about this as a thesis title? Carbon footprint analysis of t-shirt types, could reduce fabric needs of deep V t-shirts, significantly alter textile-based climatic impacts.
Wait, hit enter so I can read that.
Sorry, forgot that we were connected in a spiritual way via Slack.
I feel like we can come up with a punnier first pre-colon.
Keep your shirt on.
Yeah. That works. Keep your shirt on. Could reduce fabric needs of deep V t-shirts, significantly alter textile-based climatic impacts.
Well, let's see.
Yeah. Or what about just rearranging it? Impact of reduced fabric needs.
I kind of like doing it as a question.
Okay.
How about that? Could reduced carbon footprints due to reduced fabric needs? That feels significantly convoluted enough. Because also,
it's very convoluted.
The thing about the thesis title, you don't always want it to be as clear as possible. Like you almost want it. Maybe you don't want it to, but like style-wise, they're not always written in a way that is the smartest, most elegant way you could write it. It just has to have all of the information in sort of a word salad, right?
Gotcha.
You didn't have to do a thesis for your master's, did you?
Well, I just started my master's like last week, so.
Okay. Well, is it a thesis master's or a coursework master's?
No, it'll be a coursework master's.
So you don't even know.
I don't even know.
So here's what I've got right now, Joe.
Well, it's going to be a paper. It's not going to be a thesis. It ends with a paper.
Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down on this. Keep your shirt on, could smaller carbon footprints due to reduced fabric needs of deep V t-shirts significantly alter textile-based climatic impacts? ?
Thumbs up.
Awesome. Charles, you're doing the big work. Joe, what are you wearing right now? Let's get weird. Let's talk about what you're wearing.
I am wearing a polo shirt, which is like a t-shirt. It's related, right?
If it's got the buttons, doesn't that almost make it a V-neck?
It's almost a V-neck.
I am wearing a long sleeve button-up, and underneath that long sleeve button-up, Joe,
yeah,
V-neck undershirt.
Aw, snap.
Yep. I've been buying a lot of clothes lately. My textile carbon footprint is definitely bigger than it has been in a while. I've bought probably more clothes in the past 2 weeks than probably the past 2 years.
Yeah. Well, you got that real job now, right?
Sure do. No one in my building recognizes me. They see me. They see me coming to go. They're like, "Who's that?" They literally. We have a text thread for my building, and at one point, a petition, an informal petition, was started to bring back dirtbag scientist Ryan, and I was like, "Really, dirtbag? That doesn't seem fair." They were like, "We haven't seen you in jeans or a hat, like a baseball cap, in over a week. It's weird." Yep.
It's like a fun building,
right? I got a real job. It's weird. Joe, what are you doing? What do you got? What's happening in your life? Let's end the show. Come on, Joe. Tell us.
I mean, I got my glider rating. I talked about that already.
Are you available to hire for glider rides?
Not technically,
what's the
no.
cost? Can we make it a Patreon reward? Glider ride with Joe. Joe, if you give $1,000 a month, you can go glider riding with Joe.
Yeah, as a private pilot, I'm only allowed to accept the quote pro rata share end quote of the cost of the flight.
Okay, well, sorry folks, Joe cannot take you glider riding, but if you want to come trapezing with me, we can work that out.
Yeah.
It's fun, Joe. You should, next time you're in town, let's go trapezing.
Seems terrifying, to be honest.
You hold on to a bar and swing.
Yeah.
There's a net and everything.
What if you die?
Then you die.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case.
We've been talking about extinctions for an hour.
Yep.
It's going to happen, Joe. I could tell you, okay, here's what I can tell you, Joe.
Yeah.
0% of mass extinctions have been caused by trapezing so far.
So far?
So far. Well, yeah. Sure. Yet. It's a powerful word, yet, but it's
do we want to be the first people to fall in the next trapeze extinction?
Somebody has to be.
Trapezius extinction? What's it going to be called?
Trapezoid.
Oh, the trapezoid era.
I don't know. Well, Joe, I'm glad you're gliding.
Me too. It's fun.
I got a real job now. It should not impact the show. I'm going to work hard to make sure that it doesn't, to the best of my ability. I got some travel coming up that I'm looking forward to. But next week, for my new job that is a real job that is with the Geological Society of America, we are doing a GeoCVD. That is a Geoscience Congressional Visit Day here in DC. I'll probably talk about it more after it happens, but I want to just briefly mention that it's happening because basically a bunch of geoscientists from around the country are going to come to DC. We're going to meet with legislative offices that are either relevant to the research or that their district, that they're members of the district that is being represented, and talk about why geoscience is important to that district, why federal funding is important to getting geoscience research done, and just how the scientists in the district can be a resource to the legislative office and provide them with expert opinions on various geoscience topics as needed. So it's a really cool event. And what I would say is, since I know we have a number of people listening who are actually scientists, that if that sounds like something that would be cool to you, if you're a geoscientist, you can sign up to do one of these GeoCVDs. If not, there's probably a similar congressional visit day for your discipline. Look into it. You usually just have to apply through a society that you're a member of. So, with this GeoCVD, we have GSA members coming in, AGU members coming in, all the relevant geoscience societies are bringing in people. We're going to have, I think, over 50 scientists running around Capitol Hill next week. So it's going to be really cool. So look forward to learning more about that, but I would just encourage folks to sign up or apply to do something like that if they get the opportunity. And now that my job is a little bit more involved in policy, if you want to reach out to me personally, Ryan@sciencesorter.com, I'd be happy to talk more and help you figure something out and help you find an opportunity to come talk to your representatives on Capitol Hill about the work you do as a scientist, because I think that's really important. Right, Joe?
Yeah.
Or do you not think it's important?
Well, my representative is Kevin McCarthy, so I've just given up on everything.
In the words of John Hodgman, don't do it. Do it.
Okay.
All right. And then later this month, I'm heading to the GSA annual meeting. And then after that, I'm heading to the SVP annual meeting. So anybody who's heading to either of those, reach out, say, hey, let's talk. Charlie wants to contribute to our discussion. And yeah, that's all I got.
Woof, woof.
That's the show, Joe. We're done.
Woohoo! Sort of.
Come back next time. Can't remember if I got Peter to say it, but we know Joe's going to say it, and we know Charlie's going to bark along when you want the next episode to contain more science.
Sort of.
And Charlie
sort of
right at the time where we needed her to contribute.
She knew what was coming.
Wow.
She's been around enough of these recordings to be like, I'm going to get these guys. They think I'm going to bark right when they say sort of. I'm not. I'm going to stop right at that second.
She really did.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Wait, I have a comic book question.
Okay.
Why is Spider-Man Noir, voiced by Nick Cage, so great?
Look up. It's great because Nick Cage is actually a giant comic book fan.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
Well, his real last name is not Cage. He's a Coppola. And he named himself after Luke Cage, the Marvel Comics character.
Huh.
And he was he was Superman in the failed Tim Burton Superman that never happened.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And the reason he did Ghost Rider is because he was such a big comic book fan that he wanted to do some comic book movie.
Nice.
And he also does a great Adam West impersonation in the first Kick-Ass movie. And at one point he had to sell his comic book collection because he went bankrupt or something like that. It's kind of sad. But
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's a great comic book person. And apparently John Mulaney did some interview where he talked about how they got Nick Cage to say a lot of bonkers stuff that never made the final cut of that movie. Really inappropriate because that movie came out eventually as a PG movie.
Right.
So yeah.
I need to see that edit now.
So yeah, Nick Cage does a great job in comic book roles because he is a giant comic book fan.
All right.
So he really gives it his all.
Excellent.
So that's the answer to that question.